Greetings to everyone tuning in. I'm Dennis Hudson, and the place of interest that I chose for my video project is the Museum of Florida History. The main topic that I found to be very interesting is Florida in the Civil War. Florida had joined the Union in 1845. In 1961, Florida had a population total of 140,000, making it the smallest out of all the states that formed the Confederacy. Out of 140,000 people, 63,000 were African Americans who worked as slaves in an agriculture-based economy. Wealthy white planters had control of the political power in Middle America, title for the area between the Apalachicola and Swanee rivers that surrounded Tallahassee. Just a couple of years earlier, the U.S. was going through a crisis that brought forth concerns about slavery expanding into territorial boundaries, states' rights, and debates about the national government being controlled by either northern or southern states. Leaders in the South felt that the election of Abraham Lincoln was more in favor of the North, which caused South Carolina to vote to leave the Union in December 1860, and other southern states, including Florida, to explore the possibility of removing themselves from the Union as well. In early January 1961, delegates from all across the state met in Tallahassee to discuss whether Florida should leave the Union or not. Governor Madison Stark Perry and elected Governor John Milton both were strong supporters when it came down to secession. The debates on whether Florida should leave the Union continued for days inside and outside the convention. On January 10, 1861, the delegates came to a final decision from votes totaling 62 to 7 to have Florida withdrawn from the Union. The very next day, they had signed a formal ordinance of secession. After signing a formal ordinance of secession, the delegates later on had adopted a new state constitution. Florida was the third state to leave the Union, and within a month, it joined with other southern states to form the Confederate States of America. During the war, the conditions for African Americans in Florida varied. There are nearly 63,000 blacks throughout the state recorded in the 1860 census. To break that number down, about 62,000 were listed as slaves and less than 1,000 were freed. At the time, restriction laws only offered limited freedom to those who were classified as being free. Each region in Florida had different conditions within slavery. Many enslaved blacks worked under a gang system in North Florida. In other words, large group of agricultural workers labored from sunup to sundown. A task system was more common, which provided workers with daily tasks and also would allow personal time after all tasks were completed. In the Confederate state, most African Americans had little to no choice but to support the Confederate war efforts since they were enslaved residents. Some went to war as servants to white Southern officers. The Confederate military impressed enslaved blacks for labor projects. More than 1,000 African American men from Florida joined the Union Army, filling out the ranks of black regiments. In February 1864, Union forces landed in Jacksonville and launched a major expedition westward into the interior of the state. Union objectives included cutting off Confederate supply lines, locating recruits for black Union regiments, and establishing a pro-Union government in East Florida. The Battle of Biloxi was the largest battle fought in Florida. Approximately 5,500 Union troops clashed with a roughly equal number of Confederates at a point east of Lake City.
The notion was that if the Union Army could control Florida, then maybe they could reconstruct it. That is, build a new state government and bring Florida back into the Union before the conflict had actually ended.
For several hours in the afternoon of February 20, 1864, fighting raged in the Pine Wood near Olustee Station and Ocean Pond. As a result, the Confederate units directly engaged in the battle faced a relatively large number of Southern troops. 3 regiments of African American troops fought in the battle and suffered heavy casualties. The Confederates held their ground and inflicted a stinging defeat on the Union forces. As darkness approached, the Union troops began their retreat to Jacksonville.
The presence of black soldiers here at Olustee is significant. It's significant because after the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 allowed for African American soldiers to serve in the Union Army, their very presence was a blow against slavery, and their very presence represented the idea that this was in fact a more revolutionary struggle.
For its size, approximately 11,000 soldiers altogether, the battle was one of the most bloodiest clashes of the war, with 1,861 Union casualties and 946 Confederate casualties. The Confederate victory helped keep the interior of the state under the South's control. As the Army of Tennessee decided to surrender, other areas in the Southeast, including Florida, were instructed to yield to federal troops. News of the war's end reached Florida in rumors and fragments later in April and in early May. Several months before, Florida's Governor Milton had proclaimed that death would be the preferable to reunion, and on April 1st, he ended his life with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. During the spring of 1865, the infrastructure of the Confederacy collapsed. The northern advantages of superior numbers of troops combined with a huge industrial base had exhausted the South in a 4-year war of attrition. In a May 20th ceremony marking the formal transition of power, Union troops raised a large United States flag over the state capitol. On the same day, General McCook announced the Emancipation Proclamation, formally freeing enslaved blacks in Florida. The war was over for Florida, and the uncertain period of Reconstruction began.